Welcome to MoveTube. We are on a bit of a hog hunt at the moment. A couple of years ago, we watched The Souvenir together, and we rewatched it just now, apropos of, on the occasion of The Souvenir Part 2, the sequel. This time it's personal. I mean, it's the first one, it's pretty damn personal.
Pretty personal.
It's the London Film Festival at the moment. It's also Freeze Week, so it's a wild cultural social extravaganza. What is your second impression of The Souvenir?
Well, I said it as much when we were watching it, and obviously second viewings invite time to actually think about what you're watching, away from the fabula of the story. It felt more pointedly a satire and funnier this time. Anthony's quite blatant descent into bacchanal and death, heroin death, felt more obvious because I saw it coming. Spoiler alert. I think it's I kind of cringe to say this phrase, but the class politics of this film felt much more blatant this time. One of the observations you come away with is obviously the aura that surrounds this film, despite it being effectively a period drama of the 80s and 90s, is fundamentally there's a weightiness to Anthony, who's the heroin-using lover, being this kind of bastion of the old world, this kind of like
the Wallace collection, Foreign Office. He's like this 50s, sort of debonair 50s aristo. When you first watch a film, his vibe bleeds through the film and kind of gives it this kind of aristocratic sheen. You realise that actually he's play acting class in this film, and actually Joanna Hogg's daughter is actually, if anything, much more moneyed, much more comfortable in this environment. That to me, that wasn't as obvious the first time I saw it. I lent very heavily into Anthony's performance and believed that he actually was what he said he was. In this film, he comes across much more as a kind of a role player and a class play actor. I suppose because that there's something he's hiding and something he's covering up, and I guess he uses his sophistication, his aesthetic discernment. I was very struck, especially early on, the way that he kind of patronizes her on subjects, on basically her work as she reads out various proposals and storylines to him. As an artist, practicing artist. Yeah, as a filmmaker. And he doesn't make anything and doesn't... He works for the Foreign Office. But he has the critical discernment to berate her, but he doesn't have the motivation or discipline to create anything, or the imagination to create anything himself. No, exactly. He has a snideness. He obviously shows her early on in the film a small minor, what is actually quite a minor painting of a girl carving something into a tree or writing a letter against a tree, and it's this quite poignant moment in the film. The Souvenir, the Souvenir by Fragonard. Yeah, and it's quite a minor painting, and he shows it, and it reeks sophistication and establishment knowledge when he shows it to her. But you actually realize, in reality, this is quite a minor painting. He utilizes his access as a smart boy, like what you call a grammar school boy. There's a quite telling scene that you forget about, actually, which is that he introduces Tilda Swinton's daughter to his parents early on in the film, and they are not aristos. They are actually sort of lower middle class, quite nice people. Yeah. And he kind of stands out there as this swollen thumb, somebody who's learned learned the kind of lingo and learned the codes of conversation and the social cues of the aristocracy, and uses them to kind of baffle and blindside her to his actual deceit, which is that he's a heroin user, and it's amazing when you see it, and it as a second time, it suddenly emerges as this fully fledged satire on his own blatantness, and your own blatantness actually watching it and kind of pulling into it, and her blatant helpless love. It's hard to judge what people do for love. Essentially, a huge amount of incredibly, pathetic behavior from him. Not to mention manipulative. Him stealing all of her jewelry. Yeah, is overlooked, and basically she sort of reverts to this affectionate pity. I'm so sorry, Anthony. But let's talk about gender here. Can we not?
Why don't you want to talk about gender?
I want to talk about gender. Let's talk about gender.
Sorry, I'm not being a turf or anything. It's nothing. It's a red herring. I want to talk about because when this first came out, a few friends of mine, women, who are kind of imposter syndrome-y to an extent, loved the film. Yeah. Largely based off of the fact that they found it very relatable.
As Tilda Swinton's daughter, as this kind of seeming outsider who's trying to find her voice in the arts.
Yeah, and film direction, as we've discussed many times on this pod, is a profession that rewards confidence, assertiveness, the ability to project your vision onto, large groups of people who are listening, waiting for order, direction. Literally, that's the role of the director. It's quite hard to do. There are directors who vary that template, but basically, you need to start off from a reasonably confident place. And she doesn't. The main character here, she tries to be a film director, but every time she articulates her ideas, every time she except towards the end of the film where she grows in confidence, but there's a large amount of her creative life in the film is depicted as like a struggle to find herself worthy, and therefore everyone else is kind of puzzled. And she carries with her this huge amount of class privilege. It's interesting also that the identity politics of the film, it recalls an era where identity politics or sort of privilege discourse was located only in class, really.
It hadn't found a grounding yet, because there's certain moments in this film where people utilize the language of contemporary social justice politics in their conversations. Somebody cringes and uses the word privilege earlier. I think there's enough of a grounded context that it feels contemporary to the time when they say it. And obviously she reeks of it, because she's, one of the recurring narratives in the film is that she is always able to get a bit more cash out of her mum, Tilda Swinton, to pay, which she says kind of, abstractly, vaguely, it's for equipment and film and whatever, I need it for my course. And her mum's like, no, well, this is a bit much, but fine. But the money always is forthcoming.
Yeah. And it always ends up paying for her and for Anthony.
It always ends up paying for her and for Anthony, who obviously, for him, the illusion, the deception of, he has the confidence and the bluster to author and direct his own life as this Foreign Office kind of cad who's very comfortable in writing checks in these kind of very elaborate kind of palatial settings. But he's a complete fraud, obviously. Yeah. And she's somebody who feels like a fraud and yet has a kind of foot in the door of the creative world as I suppose a contemporary of Derek Jarman at this time. When you think about the actual context of British filmmaking at this era, and the actual kind of films you see the edges, the fringes of films she's making, and they are kind of Jarman-esque, aren't they? These kind of soundstagey.
I mean, Hogg was friends with Jarman.
Right. Yeah. There's another
Swinton
as well was a muse in Jarman's films. Yeah. So there's an element
have him to blame for her ubiquity in our visual culture.
We're going to turn this into an anti-Swinton broadside.
I mean, it almost always is, except for I think this film is. I'm going to see Memoria tomorrow, which is a film with one of Swinton's many, like with the Berger film. Let me find someone far more interesting than me and pretend that I've always been interested in what they're interested in, and kind of ruin their integrity. She doesn't do that in this film because she is absolutely at home. I'm not saying she should stay in her lane, but she has a particularly gauche way about her when she kind of tries to, I think, initiate projects, and with Hogg it's very much not a deviation at all from her general state of being, and in that way it does feel very authentic. Her performance also is actually very good. It's one of the only Tilda Swinton performances where I've actually gone like, oh yeah, you're not just a unpretty face.
Well, she's not doing the
you're not just like a weird looking alien muse. You are like her when she announces the death of Anthony. I mean, I always am deeply moved by that moment.
It's a very. I mean, that scene. Obviously, bearing in mind we're recording this in order to tee up the worst news. We're teeing this up so we can record Souvenir Part 2 tomorrow, part London Film Festival, obviously. But there is when she announces Anthony's death, we don't see Anthony's death because Joanna Hogg is not a sensationalist. That's not where the fabulous of the story lies. She descends the stairs of this 2-bedroom apartment that the daughter is renting, and she says, the worst. He says, and she just, she sort of describes some of the conditions. She describes the news, and then she kind of, rather than going to her daughter, she kind of leans into the wall, and she kind of collapses into the wall slightly. It's a very moving, really perfect piece of acting. For all the times we've criticised Tilda Swinton, she, in the right context, she really can be very moving.
And the mother's grief in that situation is very much, it speaks very truthfully to the way that parents feel grief or animosity or anger on behalf of their offspring in a way that is often more processed or like more rational than the child's, the person at the center of it. So where the daughter is feeling this kind of numbness and like devastation, and sort of she's like catatonic almost. The mother is like fully embodying like a kind of weeping sadness at every opportunity.
Well, she's thinking at that point, with my better knowledge, because often as a parent, I think, projecting through my own parents, you are aware at times you're going astray, and your parents can see it, but they trust you enough to go, I'm going to let my child kind of do this.
Yeah.
And this is one of those stages where the parents sort of the collapses on it. This is the time that, they thought maybe the power to halt this process was in our hands. So her kind of leaning into this wall is a moment of her own realization and a realization of her own fallibility as a parent. And it's quite, it's quite profound. I think as a second viewing, the lustrousness of this film, the shining kind of beauty of this film, it's a very beautiful film. It's a very, I think the right word might be, what's the word? It's quite constrictive. It's like a really too tight shirt around your throat.
Yeah. It's very close.
And
can I just say,
go on.
The reason that you said earlier that we don't see his death, I might be wrong, but I think the reason we don't see his death is a kind of structural principle that we never see anything that
matters.
The main character sees.
Yeah.
So that doesn't see. Sorry. So the reason none of Anthony's private life, none of Anthony's work life is depicted is because Julie doesn't see it.
No. You're right about that.
And we don't see his death because Julie doesn't see it. We only see his life when she's around.
We have the image of Anthony as projected through Julie, I suppose. We have her delusions and her beliefs.
And that's why it's such a shock. Even though we get sort of told by this guy at a party that he's a habitual heroin
Richard Ayoade actually says it.
A very sympathetic character for me.
A phenomenal, actually, I've got to say, a phenomenal fucking kind of bit part for Richard Ayoade here. He plays this incredible cameo from Richard Ayoade.
Best thing he's done.
He says, this moment, this dinner party, he kind of
Gadget man.
But he's so good here. He's wasted making films because he's a shit director, and I thought he's a very good actor. It turns out in this film, again, because he points out and says, I'm trying to make this tessellate. What is a sort of young Tory, which is kind of the words he used. I can't remember exactly. Rotarian, young Rotarian, doing with a habitual heroin user. And though you hear that at the beginning, and she's dumbfounded. First time I watched it, those words didn't quite pierce me as well because you're so locked into her view, and he's such a kind of alien observer that you kind of miss that by. And I don't know how much of a rube I am, but you watch the film, and you go, the second time around, you go, he's clearly a dingy heroin user who's stealing her money and robbing from her at a complete a fake. Throughout the whole film. The first time you see it, you're so buoyed up by his kind of Death in Venice, Thomas Mann vibe that you're kind of carried away with it. And it shows how powerful these codified signifiers of wealth and aristocracy are, because they lead you down a particular vibe where you don't think he's the person he is. Because this isn't a film where he's the classic heroin user who's sort of yeah, man, I like this kind of like spaced out druggy, even though he acts completely spaced out the whole fucking film. He's a man who can, he acts the entire film like he's fucking on a come down.
But anyway,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, the second time you see it, there is a huge amount of frustration. Not just, I mean, for my part, as an assertive man, I find her diffidence and imposter syndrome excruciating. But it is also, you are frustrated because you know who he really is, watching this slow motion car crash. However, we need to leave a decent amount of time to discuss part 2 tomorrow. What are your hopes and dreams?
No, tell me your hopes and dreams about part 2.
Well, of course, Anthony's gone. It's a linear narrative, so we won't see any of him. I'm rather wary of what is promised from this film. I know very little about this film, but I do know it singles out, it hones in on her creative life, which I felt was perhaps, an artist kind of narrativizing their own narrativization.
This is a semi-autobiographical film anyway.
Yeah, and she's in part 2 she depicts herself making an autobiographical film. So it's that narrative of going back to write about what you know, which is what she's told constantly by all these professors with cigarettes.
I think part 2 will probably be that. I don't know if the tensions will be as dramatic, because if it's somebody flourishing after this kind of intense tension of unawareness, often the becoming of an artist is a becoming of awareness. Her world will expand and her delusions will fall away. What works about Souvenir Part 1 are her delusions.
The other thing I think aesthetically that is frustrating with Part 1, and which I'm interested to see how it develops in Part 2, is just it's a cheap period film, which means that almost everything is filmed on a set or filmed in a field where you can't see what era it is, and then there are these shots of like Peter Jones that, like, as a Londoner, I know there are certain bits of London you can capture where it looks timeless, but there are loads of shots of like streets, of like high streets without the vape shops and the new cars and like all the signifying, temporal signifiers. So I'm hoping maybe there's a bit more money and maybe the film allows in a bit more spontaneous exterior.
Well, the question is whether part 2 is picking up immediately after part 1, or is it waiting for a lag of years.
Well, we'll find out.
To be continued.
See you tomorrow.
We're at the Royal Festival Hall, London. We've just watched Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir Part 2. So continuation of the story of Souvenir Part 1, which was a 2019 film. This is
we talked about it last night. We don't need to go any context.
we
people who've just heard us talk about it.
That's true. This is an instant reaction. I'm glad we watched Part 1 last night. I think not because it isn't important. Like part 1 actually feels tonally, structurally, emotionally very, very distinct from Part 1. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah, I would. And I think it gives, just for context for listeners, there's a horrible, irritating preacher quite on the South Bank who might be audible. Yes, I thought Souvenir Part 2 was a masterpiece. Yeah. I really, really loved it. I thought pretty much all of the flaws and irritations of Souvenir Part 1 were structurally mitigated by what the Souvenir Part 2 does.
And what does it do?
It does a kind of meta-reflection on what it is to try and tell your story and try and work with your own life experience material. And there are various conversations which are very obviously conversations she has had, not just
as a younger director,
not just in her own head. She's a late bloomer creatively, Joanna Hogg. I don't know what age she was when Unrelated came out, but she was a bit older than the character.
Well, she was a commercial director for a long time. Yeah, so her background is actually television, and there's definite nods to that in the career that Julie, the young
Julie Hart,
JH.
So, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, because she's studying very pointedly at the. She's studying very pointedly at this kind of Raynham film and
different
television.
Initials would be too great a leap, wouldn't
it? Too huge a leap.
For your cipher.
So I feel like
just quickly the plot line. Thingy has just died. Anthony's died, and she's now has more headspace to pursue her creative projects at film school. but she makes a film about her relationship with Anthony. And there are huge trials and tribulations in this creative process where her attempt to reproduce her experience authentically comes up against the creative formal limitations of filmmaking in the industry she's attempting to work for. By the end of the film, she becomes financially successful as a commercial director. And,
setting herself up on the path, re-establishing even more that this is a very autobiographical film. What is that insane rumbling? Is the world about to end and we're going to die podcasting? Yeah, so that's broadly the plot. Part two, basically, I want to say a couple of things. One of them is Jean Cocteau. There is talk about Peter Broughton, Jean Cocteau, Maya Deren. Go back to the very early legs of avant-garde experimental cinema in Europe and America. Many people were concerned with film, the poetry of film and the concept of film being to explore artistic vision and the kind of calling of the artist. So Cocteau, Blood of the Poet, for example. And Maya Deren, Message of the Afternoon, choreography, dance, all these films, blah, 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 blah. And Feast, all of these things. And I think what Joanna Hogg kind of does in this second film is it's still a kind of psychodrama about this young artist, but it's much more kind of inflected with all of these references. It's a very hodgepodge in a beautiful way.
Hogpodge.
It's, I would say, a kaleidoscope of references, which is exactly what happens to you when you go to art school and you're kind of emerging as an artist. You filter and process things that have influenced you, and what Joanna Hogg does really well is there's many films within a film here,
including like early Hogg films that are about awkward middle class people having dinner, and
like The Architect, for example. The
seething resentment, the conversations with their parents where she's asking for money, very reminiscent of the scenes in Archipelago.
£10,000.
Where exactly, which was a lot of money back then, still is, but where Tom Hiddleston is talking about going to Africa, these sort of, are you sure, darling, that's a good idea,
one of the best.
So there's that, but then there's also Jarman, right? There's also like these very theatrical, strange, surrealist soundstage films.
But I think it was actually because it's not full Jarman, those scenes. It's Jarman through Cocteau, and for that, it's much more watchable than Jarman. He's a terrible director, and I found those bits to be very, very moving. I found these nested references that she creates in the film. She creates a successful graduation film. The film we actually see on our screen is not the film she's making. It's a kind of
how did you feel about that?
Imagistic. I thought it was very clever, and it's actually,
because you kind of know the film that she has made is probably not that good.
No, it's probably not very good.
And so there's this sort of anxiety. We've seen her make this film. We've seen basically all her crew members tear her apart. We've seen just an atmosphere.
She had no shot list, which is bad.
Yeah, well, so the Brary cinematographer has a bit of a Christian Bale moment and kind of freaks out and attacks everyone. And it's just like absolutely catastrophic and knock to her confidence, and all the while, she's making herself very vulnerable in a way that a director can't necessarily afford to make themselves.
No, because
vulnerable.
she's made the decision to process her grief by making a film that she knows very, very intimately. And the thing is,
in questioning, very recent as well.
Very recent, very fresh. And the thing is, when people are criticizing, say, when the actors that she's got are trying to get inside the head of her character and they're trying to get inside the head of Anthony, they're trying to understand what the motivation is. She can't provide the motivation because she doesn't know. She's still trying to work it out herself. They're saying things like, well, why didn't they have this open conversation when she found out he was doing heroin? And she's like, well, it's all very obvious that she just did not have that conversation. That was one of the problems with her relationship with Anthony.
But all her reasoning when she talks to the actors is just like, well, this is what happened, which is very unhelpful for the actors because it suddenly makes it into a sort of therapeutic act rather than like a and I think what is so great, I am sort of, I don't know Joanna Hogg personally, but it's a fair assumption that about 85% of this probably happened to her, and I think it's pretty impressive that like what the Souvenir does, she couldn't have made the Souvenir as close to that happening as Julia makes the film she's making about the relationship. Obviously it's a shorter film, but that distance, that ability to understand what was going on in the other people's minds in that section of your life, the ability to have a bit of narrative distance to direct an actor playing a character who you fundamentally didn't understand because you were idolizing them. you know, that is something she manages to achieve in Souvenir because she's matured, she's had time. And that's kind of at the final moment when the camera pulls out of the soundstage of the film, of the flat, of everything. Because that's what irritated me so much about Souvenir is, you know, it's filmed all on a soundstage, and I almost felt like I was being like Joanna was sort of saying to me, it's okay. I know this looks like it was filmed on a soundstage. Here is the soundstage. Here I am calling the shots. And I thought that was, and the way she says cut with this kind of fierceness, you know, cut. She is now confident. She is now a confident director who shows films in the Royal Festival Hall.
I think even the funny thing was that when it emerges, there's lots of what otherwise for a lot of people would be really hackneyed, blatant metaphors in the film. Like when we watch her Souvenir, or the Souvenir we get on screen, which is not the film, that's her actual graduation film. It's this kind of Jarman-esque Jean Cocteau, Maya Deren thing. It goes through all of these nested rooms. It's kind of like it's like the fucking Crystal Maze. There's like a World War II bit. It's like Laser Quest. It's like a World War II bit, and then she has like this Aristophanes kind of Greek bit, and so on and so on and so on. She has this Venetian bit. This kind of scattered mythopoeic dreamscape, and then it kind of reverses, and at the very end there's a camera on the floor, and it rewinds, and the camera kind of levitates off the ground and kind of falls into her hand almost. You know, at the end she's gone through the trials and tribulations and she's picked up the camera. It's such a almost cringe and blatant metaphor that is brilliant. The way she really is saying this is an artist finding their voice, not just processing their trauma, they're actually finding their voice creatively. Is kind of, in less skilled hands, I think it would be kind of crap, those very blatant visual metaphors, but they're kind of quite fun. I think one of the kind of sidebar is the dad is a legend.
Her dad.
He's so funny.
Yeah, so there's this horrible, painful sub-narrative about Tilda Swinton's character, the mother, retraining in ceramics, which is briefly alluded to in the first film, and then she makes her first pot, and there's this kind of excruciating conversation about her sort of indulgent retirement, you know, hobby, basically.
I don't think she ever worked, honestly.
Yeah, they are gentlemen and ladies of leisure, and so that's why. But also, you know, they are careful with their money, which is why they still have it, you know. And yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, the character again, as I said last night, you know, Tilda Swinton is at home in her role as a sort of haughty old posh woman.
Haughty but well-meaning, sharper than she lets on.
Yeah, indeed.
I think one of the interesting things about there's lots of moments of self-awareness, and it's a very self-aware film, and it's a very funny film, and I think it's particularly, there was a lot of like in the audience from people who obviously gone to art school or involved in film in some capacity, because there's a lot of jokes for the filmmakers in there.
Yeah, maybe we have to declare our interests, right? We are creative,
and that's what she's doing, and she's not trying to go. I know it is quite an ivory tower film in some ways.
Yeah,
that's kind of its greatness, because, you know, we're allowed toys too to play with.
I mean, anyone who's made a film understands that feeling of not quite knowing what you're doing, and this terrible fear that other people on set are more in control, and that the power is moving away from you. Yeah. And it's never happened to me to such a catastrophic degree as it does in this film.
Film revolt.
But I think pretty much any filmmaker knows that is like that it could slide that way if you're not. If you don't have your
shifting power dynamic.
If you don't have your eye on things, and especially for someone like Julie, who spends a lot of the film doubting herself, a lot of the film not really being as confident in herself as a filmmaker needs to be. Yeah, exactly.
Because she admits that, you know, she goes to therapy. I was actually going to finish that thought because it's about the self-referentiality. The father is talking to her over dinner. It's very nice, and sort of is trying to kind of question her in that kind of parental way that's a bit annoying, about how it all works, like making this dissertation film. And she's just kind of like, he's like, well, no one's directing you what to do then. And so the person using the camera, he's an expert then. Oh, no, they're all students. And it's like, are you getting any help from the college? No. And he's like, oh. It's just a brilliant kind of encapsulation of art school. Yeah, it's very funny about the kind of lack of support, but the lack of support is kind of what she needs. She needs to be on her own, and struggle basically a bit, creatively to get where she needs to be. The problem she had with Anthony in the first film is that she kind of puppy dog went along with it and never, lots of times she is very naive. She asks naive questions in this. She asks Richard Ayoade's great cat. He reprises his excellent cameo again.
What's he called? Philip.
And she kind of says to him, did Anthony ever really work in the Foreign Office? And he's just like flicks a cigarette and is like, Anthony was a junkie. Move on. And it's great. Everyone is much more aware than she is, and the glowing, the kind of aura of romance, which and kind of ennui and passive, kind of entropic romance that kind of surrounds the first film is falling away here, and real kind of lively characters and situations and context are bubbling forward. It's much more situated in its era, where because the Souvenir one felt like it was in fucking Thomas Mann, it's a Thomas Mann novel or something. It very much felt like it could have been the 20s or the 10s, not in the 80s, like the colourful, booming cocaine 80s, whereas this film does feel like that.
And I think we also ought to talk about, as you say, self-referential. There's two therapy scenes. It is joining the pantheon of self-reflexive art. Everything from Man with a Movie Camera to almost everything Charlie Kaufman made. There is a strong tradition of films about filmmaking, films that have a neurotic, agonizing relationship. Even just in popular culture generally, you have Bo Burnham, you have rappers and singers who write about the struggle to express, in and of itself. And and I think I am often highly critical of self-referential works, which seem to be, 8.5 actually is a great example of a masterful piece of
negotiation of that self-referentiality exactly. Without being indulgent.
But indulging enough, 8.5 is fanciful. It is imaginative. It is joyous. In a way that Souvenir Part 2 does as well. In a way that surprised me. I was surprised at how formally bold it was, just based on what Hogg's first few films were like.
It was very much more formally inventive, structurally inventive, and complicated than the first film or anything I've seen by her actually. And even because in part I think what we're seeing is for what you mentioned last night and what you've just heard is Ralph saying that one of the things we see in the first film is we only really see what she sees. And actually Joanna Hogg references that in this film, because there's a section where she's negotiating moving the camera, and she literally says as much. She says, no, I think the camera should only be showing what the actor can see, only what she can see. Confirms it very nicely. Good trenchant observation, Ralph. But here her view is expanded because she's emerging as an artist, so there's lots of these intercut little moments of B-roll, some flowers in the garden, some of it some kind of scratched film, blown out kind of bokeh film, and there's little bits of
it's an integrated cinematic collage.
It truly is. It's showing properly, her.
It's actually a very successful synthesis of, a mythopoeic, perhaps. I'm not sure if I'm using that correctly, but a brackage form and a conventional narrative drama. Which I think is like, most filmmakers most art house filmmakers should be aiming for something like that, something that brings in an element of experimental cinema. And incorporates it within the emotional thrust of a narrative film. She does that.
But she's actually done it in a really interesting way, because a lot of people start off making these kind of expressive, imagistic films and then move towards a greater realism as they get access to better quality equipment and sound and lighting. And she's actually gone the opposite way.
Yeah, she started in naturalistic
stuff.
And you still have these moments of painful naturalism that are just like, oh God, people actually say that. Fucking hell.
It's very well scripted. Even the moment where she eventually breaks her mother's pot, it falls off the counterpiece, and it's this great comedy of manners when the mother's kind of
worst things happen at sea.
The father says, and the mother's got this kind of quite neurotic kind of like, oh, it's very sharp. Yes, it's very sharp, and she cuts her finger. She's worried about the dogs, and you've got this very laconic dad. Worst things happen at sea, and it's very like real and really rooted in real kind of family dynamics, and it's very well observed about how people, particularly bourgeois people, interact. And about how students interact, like the interactions of her classmates, which are one of the best things about the first film, with these wonderful party scenes. Everyone loves a good party scene. It's like right out of Kutsiev, these great, fun ensemble party scenes. But yeah, very well observed. And like you said, it's fully integrated. It brings in the kind of methodologies of experimental film, and that expands the possibility of this. And it shows that her third eye is opening.
Yes.
As a creative person, you know, because you've seen about this is which the flashes of her imagination are coming in.
Yeah, and it's like cliched, but it's you know, it's like, yes, you have earned this obviousness, and I love it. Like, that's how I felt during the scene where her film in quotes is showing. And it's a very bold move to not show any of the film that was being made during the film, and to show this kind of like.
You like that?
Yeah. I was very, but I did think, I was like, ooh, fuck, this is a risk, you know, and it totally won. And then the way it ends, just on her running and listening to pop music, and then it just goes straight into her life. You know, there is a really, I mean, I'm sure it took a while to edit. It is a really confident, almost, you know, it reminded me of Mirror by Tarkovsky. Like, there is a very confident mixing and collaging of different textures, different elements, different worlds, to express a life, and that made it extremely moving.
Yeah, you're right about Mirror, because you know, obviously one of the things about Mirror, it's a great symbolically rich film that exists heavily in a dream space. But a lot of Mirror is also just people talking, or having a chat
awkward
in a room.
Moments in people's lives, you know.
Yeah, and you forget that because the
scene in the print where she's made an error on the newspaper.
Yeah, and it's a really
it's
a very Hoggian scene actually, because following her this worker in her factory.
Yeah.
I think. I'm glad there's certain things about like Souvenir 1 that she dropped a bit in this, which I'm glad. Like there was still some, but this really over-coded use of music, contemporary pop music. There's a lot less of it. That was a bit
irritating in Souvenir 1. And then when it happened in Souvenir Part 2, I was more in favour of it. Like the use of talk, I thought was very
Talk was great, but there's less of it, so it's a bit more meaningful when it does happen. It usually signals a kind of transition in the film, whereas in the first one it was like every change of scene, it was like, right, we're going to smack a pop song on. And I think that was kind of irritating, and she does less of it now. And it's a good reminder that even though a couple of years have elapsed between Part 1 and Part 2, she's still progressing as a filmmaker. So all the conversations that she's having on set, the young Julie is having on set, are still very pointed for Joanna Hogg as a mature director today. Like, she's still obviously taking lessons on board. And I found, that was great for me. I was really, you know, I was actually a tiny bit late to the film, but when I sat down, it felt different. The energy of the film.
Which scene did you walk in on?
When Richard Ayoade's giving that TV interview.
Oh, good. Okay, that wasn't too late.
No, it wasn't too light deep in.
There was earlier. There was just her at home with the parents, and then visiting the parents of Anthony, and then going to therapy. Yeah, just these kind of. Like almost just filling you in if you hadn't seen the Souvenir 1 recently.
Yeah, just like FYI, she's grooving. You know, I don't really feel
very sensitively done. You know, I liked it a lot.
I know a friend of the pod, Lucy Bull, said you really need to see Part 1 again before you see Part 2.
Soon,
she might be here actually to third mic, but I didn't think that was true. You know, I actually could have waited a couple of years. You know, professionally we had to watch Part 1 last night, but I didn't feel it depends on it. You know, it feels very autonomous as a film. You know, you could even watch them back to front if you want. I don't think they're not super integrated together.
I mean, I would say the complete opposite. No,
really?
I mean, they're like two halves of one film. I
don't think so. I think it felt really autonomous to me. Like, I mean, maybe I'm just saying that because I had the luxury of seeing Part 1 literally about 12 hours
of having seen
I've got film privilege.
Because I don't think it would be that much. I mean, it would still be very good, but it just would be a missed opportunity to watch number 2 without having seen 1.
Well, it demands that some screenings start doing a double bill of this film.
Yeah.
Do you think she's going to do a Part 3? Or do you think that's going to be flogging is she just going to like basically turn her whole life into
No, because
film?
I think the ending is very decisive. I think the way that, you know, when she says cut,
cut,
because she is very posh. Yeah, it's the way she says. You know, no, I mean, I'm also very posh. I acknowledge that. But the way she says cut, I feel, and the way that it is closing off a chapter, and it is obviously working through. I think we may be seeing the beginnings of Lucy Bull.
Oh, really?
I'm seeing a reflection.
Okay,
Lucy Bull, Lucy Bull.
Just in time.
Chris, welcome.
Chris, Lucy,
join
hello.
the pod. We're on air. We're on air.
Hey, how are you doing?
How you doing?
Yeah, good.
Nice to meet you.
Grab a mic. Hello. Sorry, I don't have a fourth mic. We might be wrapping up, actually.
Yeah. What you've seen the Souvenir Part 2, Lucy. What are your thoughts?
Hit us. It's been a minute.
Put the mic to the mouth.
It's been a minute, but I kind of remember my thoughts on it.
Is it better than the
Did you guys like it?
Loved it. Yeah, I thought it was a beautiful, self-reflective masterpiece.
I can't hardly hear.
Oh
what you're
I
saying,
forget I haven't got these. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh yeah, shit.
I mean, really not what I normally would go for. And I saw it immediately after the first one.
That's what we did. We took your advice.
We watched it last night. Yeah.
But back to back.
Oh right.
Oh, back to back, really. Yeah.
You have double feature.
Oh shit.
So really long, bleak night, but
long dark night of the soul, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah. It was really. I thought it was really inspiring. Actually, kind of made me even want to make a film.
That's a sign of a good film.
Yeah.
I think honestly, if you feel empowered to create and inspired, rather than because the first film closes down all of that possibility because it is a very dark.
Yeah.
Traumatic. It didn't make you want to do anything, really.
Exactly. It's more discouraging. But the second one, I think where she ends up at the end, it's actually more non-linear in terms of its narrative.
For sure.
And that, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but the kind of more dream sequence.
That's what we were saying.
Yeah,
section
the
of
film
it
she makes or doesn't make.
Yeah, it's like when she's in that field and, suddenly it switches into that dream sequence. It's almost like she's realizing what the film could be and the potential for what film is.
Yeah, it's definitely not the film she was making, and it might be an impossible film. This is actually the film that is in her head, which she struggled to translate into. Through the kind of struggles of art school, she couldn't quite create that film.
Right, and I don't think she can now either, but she was able to do it because she created this structure of somewhat of a narrative in terms of in the movie of The Souvenir. She could do this experimental thing because it's embedded within this larger movie.
Yeah, it basically cool. It created the conditions for her to make films. To actually mature artistically, because that's what the second film feels like. It's like the portrait of the artist, isn't it?
And formally, it's such a paradox because that film, if you watch that film on its own, it would just feel like a slightly strange, over-the-top experimental film. But as set within this more conventional, naturalistic world that's already been portrayed, especially in Souvenir Part 1, that kind of the largeness, the obviousness of it, the drama of it, the over-the-topness of it, the Jarman-esque qualities of it that perhaps some of us that don't like so much in Jarman work so well and enhance the feeling and enhance the emotion of it. And
she did Jarman better than Jarman.
Yeah, she would
Jarman,
disagree with that.
I'm sure she would.
But
she's his student. She's his student, whatever. But
But yeah, no, I was really moved by. I was very moved by it.
I felt a bit teary, but I'm also quite hungover, so that might have been it. But I did feel a little bit. I'm all fucked up. I cried last night when I was watching the film, like a baby, which never happens.
The Souvenir?
No. When I was watching, I did feel teary during that. I felt teary when I was watching Terrence Malick. I was shit-faced as well. I was watching it, doesn't help. And now I'm hungover and I feel very teary. This is good.
Yeah.
I feel
hungover is a good way to see. Movies and art in general.
I encourage everyone to be horribly hungover.
This episode is sponsored by alcoholism.
This actually is sponsored by San Miguel, our unofficial sponsors.
That would be nice.
Thanks,
one
lads.
day.
I think that might be it. Because this is so antisocial. Because you're sitting here waiting for us to finish. So should we wrap up?
I did like the character Patrick, though. That was kind of.
What's that his name?
Yeah, he's very
Richard Ayoade.
Yeah, he is. His character is.
Isn't he a real director?
Yeah, he's a shit director. He's not very good.
He's a kind of a British comedian who does panel shows and stuff, and he's made 2 films.
In a comedy role, he plays quite useless nerds and kind of absurd, just childish nerds, basically. So
he's
him
more of a
playing
Chad in this one,
Yeah, he actually plays like a really unusual... I think he is playing himself, actually, in this film. Like, I think he's much more like the actual Richard Ayoade rather than the characters he normally plays.
The beautiful thing about his character is that I agree with everything he says, but I think he's a prick.
He's a prick, but he's right. You know, when he
I
tells
don't know
her
what that
to
says about me,
about,
but it's like, yeah, get a grip, get yourself together, just have confidence.
Yeah, you know, when she says Anthony was a junkie, move on.
Right.
You know, that's what she needs to hear. But no one's really telling her that. Everyone's being very, very nice and bourgeois and kind of repressed about it. And they say, you know, oh, you're allowed to feel what you need to feel and whatever. And it's like, no, she needs to be told to kind of get a grip, you know, which is to make the film. Because he tells her to do that as well. He says, make a memorial to Anthony, make the film.
And he's like, try not to be obvious.
Yes. Also,
and
really
that's
good
probably
advice.
what she felt like she did in the first one, is what I kind of gathered from that.
Is that what Hogg has said in interviews about the first one?
I mean, I think she said that she wrote both at the same time, but she completely abandoned the script for part 2
after one.
So after one.
Wow.
Brilliant. That's so good.
So it seems like maybe she learned a lot from doing
not
part
to be
1.
obvious.
Yeah.
It's such
I mean, I think the word obvious
Yeah.
is a complicated one for me because I think when art is really good, it is obvious, and I think being obvious is like
it's not blatant. Is
I think that it you know, but it's like you have to be very good to be obvious, you know, to
or
go
just
down that route.
try not to be too literal or not to say too much or you know.
That's what like Hogg has kind of struggled with her whole career, and it's sort of like kind of a surprise just based on those earlier films which were very good at a particular very limited form of naturalism that she's, you know. But then you'd see her screening programs in London, you know, and also more. She would show all this Chantal Akerman and Tarkovsky and Bellatar and experimental films, and you were like, hold on, mate, you actually have a cinematic vision that is far beyond like these.
But I
these
could never see
interesting
it in her films. I really saw
here,
it.
She's like fully daring to hope.
Yeah. Joanna Hogg, go and see it.
Yeah. The ending is really nice. How it just kind of like falls apart.
Yeah. It just becomes this meta narrative. And then she's just like cut. It becomes fully Grievian. Yeah, fucking hell.
That's the other self-referent. We were talking earlier about like the pantheon of self-referential films. Some of it, you know, like sometimes self-referentiality is the most irritating thing ever, and sometimes it like is the perfect treatment of a certain
It's
scenario.
Jean Cocteau. It's lyrical self-referentiality. That's what it is. I think.
Very good. Thank you, Lucy, for joining us at the last minute.
Just made it in time.
Yeah, perfect.
It's a maze here.
It is wild. The South Bank. Festival of Britain. Thank you for listening, listeners. Enjoy.
I'm glad you guys are doing MoobTube again.
We are. It's back. We felt IRL post-lockdown.
We just go and watch a film now, and we do it automatically afterwards.
That's perfect.
So we don't get a chance to think about it, or you know. Yeah. Fuck it.
Great.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Bye.